The year is 2011. Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords is doing a Congress on Your Corner event speaking to potential voters about her platform as a candidate. It's 1:01 p.m. and NPR just broke the story that Representative Giffords has been gunned down and killed. An hour later, NPR reports the news on live air. At 2:06 p.m., sends a newsletter to all NPR subscribers confirming the news, and at 2:12, tweets their nearly 2 million followers that Giffords was dead. But NPR has it all wrong, because only 24 minutes later, the hospital Giffords was being treated at confirmed she went into surgery around 2:30 p.m. And following that announcement, NPR should have done two things. They should have sent out another email correcting their mistake, and also acknowledged it during their 3 p.m. broadcast that day. But neither of those things were done. And it was not until 2 p.m. the next day that NPR finally apologized for their mistake. So the question is, where did NPR go so wrong? Well, for starters, they never asked their sources where or how they got their information, and they also never got their story cleared by a senior editor, which certainly should have been the case considering this was the reporting of a death of such a well-known figure. Even NPR, a news source known for their high standards and unbiased reporting, was caught in the crosshairs of one of the biggest mistakes news organizations can make. NPR never intended to get that story wrong, but the rush, pressure, and competitiveness to be the first news organization to break a breaking story created for a situation in which the standards of factual reporting were simply not met. Today, I want to talk to you all about what happens when stories go wrong, specifically news stories. When we are watching or reading the news, we are essentially consuming one big story. And our society has gotten to a point where to stay educated, we must tune into the news. But I know that's not always the case, because who here likes watching the news? I mean, truly enjoys watching the news. I'm talking as locked into a news segment as you were to the LSU-Alabama game when Brian Kelly surprisingly went for that 2-point conversion in overtime to house either one of the best victories in LSU history or some very upset Tiger fans. And you'll know why we are that way later on from Arden's launch presentation. But odds are, none of you get that same feeling from when you watch that game to when you watch the news. And that's okay, but only for right now. Because my goal today is to lay out why you might feel that way and what not only the news industry, but ourselves can do about it. First, I'll focus on how the news industry can change, and then I'm going to switch gears and focus on how we as viewers can change to make the news more trustworthy. But first, let's start with the news. A poll done by Gallup in 2021 found that only 36% of Americans have a fair amount of trust in the news, a staggering low percentage. So why has American trust plummeted so low in recent years? Well, I'd argue it's because newsrooms are hectic places. Not all broadcast journalists are on the same page as their mission as reporters, and the industry has dealt with some foreseen trust issues, mostly due to how the industry as a whole functions. News organizations often report information in a haste so they can have the glory of being the first news organization to break a story. However, this routine often translates into the reporting of unreliable information. I want you all to now put yourselves in the shoes of Gabrielle Giffords' family members. If you had heard from an established news source that your loved one had been shot and killed in a shooting, to only later hear that that might not be the case, it is without a doubt that your sadness is now met with confusion and an attempt to fill gaps. The whole situation could have been avoided if NPR was not so worried about the substance of that story, but the people behind that story. Worried about how this breaking news would be received before just rushing to get it out first. Instances like these are exactly why it's so hard for us to trust the news. But the solution to our distrust that I researched in my thesis and am here to share with you all actually is something we do every single day, telling stories. I want you all to now think of the best story you've ever been told. Maybe it was Father Scully's explanation of how pumped up the LSU fight song gets him, or it was in Miss Howell's world history class when she recounted her 9/11 experience, or maybe it was even from a friend about some ungodly event that happened over the weekend. No matter what it may be, that story has stuck with you. That story has literally changed the way you will view and think about something for the rest of your life. I mean, personally, I don't think I will ever view bunnies the same after hearing Miss Purnell admit to us that she used to kill them for her profession. Stories shape our everyday lives, And the reason well-told stories stick with us is because when they're being told, they're activating all sorts of networks in our brains, emotional as well as language processing. Stories appeal to our senses, drawing our attention more clearly and leaving an impact on us. And when journalists are doing their reporting, they're simply functioning as a storyteller. And it's up to them to ensure not only what they're reporting on is true and factual, but that it's also just told well. Now, the best example of a true storyteller like journalists I can give you all is Katie Couric. And total disclaimer, I love Katie Couric. If I could have a dinner party with anyone in the world, Katie Couric would certainly be at the top of my invite list. She is an Emmy Award-winning journalist who has reported on The Today Show, CBS Evening News, and CBS 60 Minutes. She is the perfect embodiment of what it means to be a storyteller. However, she did not just get there by her huge smile and bubbly personality. Couric wanted to get to know her viewers. She wanted to get to know the people she interviewed, and she wanted to show us that she too was a real person, committed to telling others stories and also doing it well. I mean, only someone like Katie Couric would be seen getting a colonoscopy on live television. True story, by the way. Couric devoted her career to putting her viewers first, showing that the news can and should be trusted. She felt a responsibility to tell those breaking news stories, but also understand that it's real people behind those stories. So why does taking the time to report the news more like a story instead of a catchy headline with a quick few facts work so well for Katie Couric? Well, it works because of the way stories work. We've all seen this image of the main points in stories that writers must include. And we know that it can take a minute to expose these parts of a story. But we also know that it's okay to take a minute, because these are the essential parts of stories that just make them good to listen to and read about. What I'm trying to convey to you all is that the news industry should begin to follow this storytelling model when reporting the news, because it will not only help them slow down their process of reporting better, but also help us understand those stories more clearly. So, now that I've pointed all the fingers at the news industry and journalists and reporters, what can we do? Well, there are numerous ways we as viewers can take better initiative into ensuring we're consuming more complete stories. For example, you could subscribe to a news organization's newsletter, or follow a reporter on Instagram, or maybe even listen to a podcast to get your news. Essentially, tapping into any form of news media that will give you more of a story than just a segment that you might watch in the evening. And if none of these things I just listed are part of your daily routine, don't freak out quite yet, because today I'm going to leave you all with an example of a way you can do all of this. This is Jessica Yellen. She is a former White House correspondent who stepped away from the cable news scene and started her own newsletter called News Not Noise. She started this newsletter because she believes that the news should give you information, not a panic attack. She wants viewers to know which stories matter and which are simply told to fill airtime and increase revenue. She also has an Instagram account, which I encourage all of you to go follow after my presentation, where she answers her followers' questions with facts and context. Being informed with the entire story and stories that actually matter can all happen with a simple click of a button and a follow of an Instagram account. Diversifying the type of news we consume will open us up to far more than just the bad stuff we see on TV. I encourage all of you to read about the world around us, engage with new ideas, and learn from different perspectives. And thankfully, we all attend this powerhouse of an institution, so I'm confident you all know how to keep a watchful eye. The solution to our distrust in the news is a two-way street, where both ourselves and journalists are doing a better job in consuming and reporting more factual stories. Yes, it will take longer, but don't you think taking the time to get that story right is worth far more than hearing false information all the time? So let's do our best to make the news a bit more bearable. Let's make it feel like that LSU game or that story from Miss Purnell. Let's make it not feel that every time we receive a news notification, it's felt as a flood of bad news, but instead a wave of fresh stories. Thank you.